Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Tonight we are learning Maseches Succah, Daf Yud Beis. We're starting at the bottom of Yud Aleph Amud Beis, around 9 or 10 lines from the bottom. We had quoted a rule in our previous Mishnah about Succah, and the rule that we were talking about was Zeh HaKlal Kol Davar Shebekabel Tuma, that if something is Mekabel Tuma, then it cannot be used for Succah, and then it can be used for Succah. Let's just look back at the rule itself. The Mishnah writes on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, Zeh HaKlal Kol Shemekabel Tuma ve'ein Gidula min haaretz ein mesachachin bo. Anything that can be Mekabel Tuma and anything that doesn't grow from the ground, that cannot be used for Succah. So our Gemara here on Yud Aleph Amud Beis 9-10 lines down asks, Min hanimili, how do we know this to be the case? Where do we learn these rules from that the Succah have to be something that are not Mekabel Tuma? And the Gemara is going to present 4 different answers up until the Mishnah on Yud Beis Amud Aleph, one clean sugya. Answers the Gemara with answer number 1. Amar Reish Lakish Amar Kra, because the pasuk says the Eid Ya'aleh min haaretz. Eid Aleph Daled means in this case mist or dew, something that would come up from the ground. And then the Gemara makes a strange comment. Ma'ed, just like this mist is davar she'einu mekabel tuma, we know that water is not mekabel tuma. You could have a person who's tamei tumas nida go into a mikvah, she can come out of the water. The next woman could go in tamei tumas nida and come out of the water. Both of them would be tahora. The water is not mekabel tuma, that we know. But v'gidulo min haaretz, it grows from the ground. Obviously, it doesn't mean it grows from the ground. It means that it's elevating from the ground. Some type of evaporation process is happening. V'eid ya'aleh min haaretz, and it's min haaretz. So therefore, we know that this aid, that this mist is davar she'ein mekabel tuma, and it's gidul min haaretz. Af Succah, or in particular the Succah, that too has the same rules of davar she'ein mekabel tuma v'gidul min haaretz. So that's answer number 1. And in order to understand the depth of this answer, we really need to look at this question. So it says the Gemara 6 lines from the bottom of Yud Aleph Amud Beis, Hanicha lemando amar anane kavod hayu. We know, of course, we've all heard this from childhood in our day schools, that the Sukkah is representative of the anane hakavod. The problem is that we have to understand the psukim here. One shita does hold that the Sukkah represents anane hakavod, and the other holds that that's not what the pasuk means. So the Gemara says first it asks our question, and then it actually goes into the brisa. I could understand that we're going to make a comparison between the mist of Eid Ya'aleh min haaretz and Succah. I could understand that if you say anane hakavod, because clouds are mist, that I could understand. But according to the one who says that the psukim actually indicated that there was no anan for the actual sukkahs, but rather there were actual sukkos, so then my ikala meimar. And now the Gemara explains its question in full. 5 lines from the bottom, Yud Aleph Amud Beis. The Tanya, the Brisa writes, the pasuk says, Ki basukoso shafti es b'nei Yisrael. What does the pasuk mean when it says basukoso shafti es b'nei Yisrael? What does the word sukos mean in this context? That is subject to a machlokes in the Tanaim. Answer number 1, anane kavod hayu. It wasn't actually a sukkah like we know with walls and schach. It wasn't. It was ananim. They were being protected by sukos, in quotes. It's not actually the literal translation, but rather something that was a cloud that protected the Jews. But Rabbi Akiva savar Sukkos mamash asulahem, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu actually made Sukkos for them. Now we can understand the Gemara's question. Hanicha Rabbi Eliezer. I could understand your comparison of aid of mist to the cloud. That works perfectly for Rabbi Eliezer, and that's why we can learn one from the other, from the world of water to the world of Sukkah, because they're the same. If the word Sukkos in the Torah meant clouds, and this pasuk Eid Ya'aleh min haaretz is what clouds look like, I understand. Ela the Rabbi Akiva, who holds that the pasuk was talking about Sukkos mamish, ma'ikol meimar. How then can you compare water to Succah? What does one thing have to do with the other? And therefore, the Gemara presents answer number 2. We're satisfied according to Rabbi Eliezer, but Rabbi Akiva needs another answer. 3 lines from the bottom. What is answer number 2? So again, we're trying to figure out, how do we know our ground rules for Succah, that they have to not be mekabel tuma, that they have to come from the ground. Here's answer number 2. Kiyasa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, and he came from the shiur of Rav Yochanan. Amar Rav Yochanan, he was in his shiur. Amar Kra, he said that Rebbe taught us the following thing. Rav Yochanan taught us the following. The pasuk says, Chag ha-sukos ta'aselach, makish sukkah lechagiga. The pasuk has the word chag, and it has the word sukos. And therefore, the pasuk makes a hekesh, a comparison between the korban chagiga and a sukkah, namely schach. Ma chagiga Just like a korban chagiga is davar she'enu mekabel tuma, an animal that's alive cannot become tameh, and v'gidulo min haaretz, it grazes and it grows itself from the ground. It doesn't grow from the ground, but it eats the grass and therefore can grow. V'gidulo min haaretz. Therefore, says the Gemara, last line of Yud Aleph Amud Beis, af sukkah davar she'enu mekabel tuma v'gidulo min haaretz. Very good. So this is answer number 2, where we try to make a hekesh, a comparison between the korban chagiga and the world of Succah. But on the top of Yud Beis Amud Aleph, the Gemara has a problem with this. Maybe you could take a small little calf and you can tie it at the top of your sukkah Succah. Because if what you're trying to say is that where we learn Succah from, the rules of Succah, is from the korban chagiga to Succah, because the pasuk has the word chag and sukkos in the same pasuk. Does that mean that I could use an animal for my Succah? There's mishnayos that we're going to learn about whether or not you can use an animal for your walls, but for the Succah, can't be. So says the Gemara, you're right, and therefore the Gemara presents answer number 3, second line of Yud Beis Amud Aleph. Kiyasa Ravin Amar Rav Yochanan Amar Kra. Ve'asbecha migornecha umi kvecha. When you collect from the grains and from the wine products, and then the Gemara explains the pasuk. Bipsoles goren v'yekev akasu medaber. The pasuk here is talking about the psoles, what's left over after extracting the grains, so the chaff and whatever other parts of the plant that are there, and whatever is left over after the grapes are pulled away. The actual cluster, the actual vine itself. So maybe that's what we're talking about. Says the Gemara, well, how do you know from the pasuk that the pasuk is talking about the leftovers? Asks the Gemara, ve'ema goren atzmo, ve'yekev atzmo. Maybe we're talking about grain itself, and maybe we're talking about the grapes itself. And that's very problematic because we know that food is mekabel tuma. Because we're familiar with the custom as quoted in Shulchan Aruch that when one eats vegetables that are wet, we're obligated to wash our hands without a bracha, according to all shitas except for the Gra. And this opinion, according to my Rabbeim, still applies nowadays. If someone's going to eat washed grapes and they're wet, then you should wash your hands with netilas yadayim, proper, 2 on the right, 2 on the left, same halachas as usual, just with that we don't make a bracha. If you want to avoid that, you can eat with a fork and knife. If you want to avoid that, you can dry off the fruit or the vegetables, whatever it is. But it is halacha l'maisa. Either way, food is mekabel tuma. So if food is mekabel tuma, and you're trying to learn from the pasuk of be'asbecha migarnecha mikvecha, and the pasuk is talking about grain and grapes, that doesn't work because that's actually mekabel tuma. So says the Gemara, how do you know what the pasuk's talking about? So Amar Reb Zera, don't worry. Yekev ksiv kan. Take a look at Rashi. 3rd line, Dibur Hamaschel, Yekev ksiv. Yekev is a reference to grapes, and Rashi writes, Demashma la'achar shenase yayin. The assumption in the pasuk is that it's already been made into its final product. What are you going to do? Pour wine on top of the sukkah for Succah? It's not going to stay there. That doesn't work. So therefore, because Yekev can't be a reference to actual final product of wine, which would have been mekabel tuma, it must be talking about the vine. So too by the grain portions as well. The ef shar l'sakech, but you're not able to make Succah out of wine. So therefore, the whole pasuk must be talking about the psoles of the leftovers of the vine from grapes and whatever is left over, the chaff, etc., from the grains. But the Gemara has a problem with this as well. Maske flor of Yirmiyah. Maybe we should say the ema yayin karush. Maybe what we're talking about is that there apparently were people who would dehydrate the wine into some type of jelly. And it was thick enough. We learned about this, I think, in Maseches Tamid, with all the libations in the drains, that they would send the pirchei kihuna, the little kids, they'd send them down there to unplug the drains because the wine, as it dehydrates, would become very thick and gross and, cellulosey looking. So maybe that's what we're talking about. So Amar Reb Zera, he kind of throws his hands up. He's like, that's a great point. And we thought we had all the answers in place. Also, Rabbi Yirmiyah b'shadav narga, and Rabbi Yirmiyah comes along and he throws an axe. This would be today's colloquialism. You threw a wrench into the system, and that was a line that apparently either we got from them or we made up on our own separately of them. But that's very clear from the Gemara. That was a line that they were using. Either way, this is a problem because maybe that's really pshat in the pasuk. Maybe when the pasuk says ba'asbecha migarnecha mikvecha. Maybe what the pasuk means is not the psolas, not the branches, which would be a wonderful limud in order for us to learn what Succah is, but maybe it's talking about yayin karush, and maybe we should be able to take wine that's congealed and use it as Succah on our sukkah. That would be pshat in the pasuk. So it says the Gemara, no, you've misunderstood the pasuk. There's one letter you were not looking at carefully. Take a look at this answer, 8 lines down, Yud Beis Amud Aleph. Rav Ashi Amar, mi garnacha, from the grains, not the grain itself, but from the grains, velo goran atzmo, and miyikvecha, from the grape product, velo yekeb atzmo. Beautiful diuk in the pasuk, and therefore answer number 3 stands the test of the Gemara. And what that means is that we learn from this pasuk that the psolis of grain and the psolis of grapes can be used for schach in that they are not makabel tuma and they are gidulo min hakarka. Beautiful. All right, that's another answer. Here's answer number 4, and this will bring us. No, it's the branches of. It's miikvecha. It's not the grapes itself. It's the psoles of. It's not the grapes itself. It's not the wine itself, but the vines. And the vines are perfectly fine to use. You have to pull the grapes off. But that is an acceptable response. The Gemara entertained the possibility of congealed wine, but rejected it from the letter mem of miyikvecha, from the grapes, but not the grape itself. And answer number 4, Rav Chizda Amar Mehacha, Tzu hahar veheviu ale zayis, you should please bring for me from the mountains, ale, the leaves of, or the branches of zayis, of olives, ve'ale eitz shemen, ve'ale hadas, ve'ale tamarim, ve'ale eitz avos. All of these different types of tree branches, a wonderful and acceptable answer, except for a technical side issue, a tangential point. The Gemara says 1/3 of the way down, hainu hadas, hainu eitz avos. The way we refer to hadas, to hadasim in the Torah is anaf eitz avos ve'arvei nachal. This pasuk over here says ale eitz avos. Are they the same things? Let's ask the question in more halachic terms. Are they interchangeable? What you're referring to here in the pasuk that you can use for schach, can I also put it as part of my lulav and vice versa? What's viable as something to be used for hadassim for my lulav and esrog, can I also use as schach? So the Gemara says, slow down, don't worry so much. Amar Rav Chizda, hadas shote l'sukkah. There's a wild type of hadassim which are kosher for a sukkah, but not for a lulav and esrog. The eitz avos lelulav, and the thicker one can be used for a lulav. How do we know to distinguish between the two of them? This is one of the things that you will get when you see a hechsher on top of your hadassim. Take a look at a critical Rashi for us to understand what hadassim really are. This Rashi is 1/3 of the way down, maybe a drop more. Dibur hamaschil hadas shote. What is this wild type of hadassim? Says the Gemara, she'eno kasher lelulav. And such critical words, whenever we look at our hadassim, we're never going to see them the same. Levi she'ein avoso asuya shel shalosh alin. Our hadassim that we have, all 3 of the leaves emanate from the same place on the stem. But the hadassim shotin, it's 2 and then 1. So that's what hadassim ksherim are, the ones that we use for lulav and esrog. Those have to be ones where all 3 of the leaves protrude and emanate from one nodule, from one spot on the stem. Masha'ein kain the hadassim shotin, which are different. And that's what?
A mold, there's plenty of hadassim shotin being passed.
Yeah, well, you don't need the whole thing to be perfect. We only need a certain set of it, a tefach, whatever it is. But yeah, I'm sure prior to all the hechsherim of the Chazon Ish and all the other rabbanim chashuvim, prior to all of that, I'm sure that that's the case. And by the way, we could also walk down the street. There are people who have hadassim trees in front of their homes. You could walk over and take a look. Is that kosher for lulav and esrog? All 3 leaves would have to grow from the same spot, all emanating from the same spot. Mash'ein kein hadassim shotim. That brings us to a new Mishnah. From here until the end of the day today, we're going to be talking about different types of schach and whether or not those types of schach are kosher. Up until now, sikum hadvarim, we learned about the marim makom of how do we know that schach has to be something that's not makabel tuma and is something that's gidula min hakarka, and we presented 4 different answers. You can look through all 4 of those answers. New Mishnah. Chavile kash, if you have a bundle of kash of straw, v'chavile eitzim of wood, v'chavile zeradin, certain types of twigs. So the halacha is ein mesachachin behem. We're going to play off of this language shortly of ein mesachachin behem as to whether or not that language is strong enough to be deoraisa or only derabanan. V'chulan, and all of those, shehitiran ksheros, if you untie the knot that's holding them as a chavila, that's holding them as an actual bundle, so then it's for sure kosher for schach. V'kulan, and all of them, even if they are bundled, are ksheros ledefanos, for sure. Why not? Let's say you have a warehouse of bales of hay and whatever shape, you could stack them one on top of that. That can be your sukkah, no problem at all. Schach is what we're talking about, though. The Gemara opens halfway down Yud Beis and Aleph. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, let's remember his name is going to come up again in about 15 lines. Rabbi Yaakov says, when I was in shiur, Shamis Minei de Rav Yochanan Tarte, I learned 2 different Mishnayos, 2 different sources in the Tanaim from Rav Yochanan. Chadaha, one was this Mishnah right here, our Mishnah that we just learned above, that if you have these bundles, then you have to separate them, you have to untie them in order for them to be kosher for schach, and they're always kosher for walls. The idach, and the other thing that I learned from him, which is also a Mishnah here in the Masechta that we're going to learn in about 4 days, the idach, hachotet begadish lasos lo sukkah eina sukkah. So I just want to, I'll explain and then I'll highlight the language here. Hachotet begadish, let's say you have stacks of bales of hay. And instead of taking them to build your walls, you literally carve out, you like remove from the middle to build your sukkah. So you already have schach on the top, you have rows, right? And then you just remove out from under it. So we should go in our brain say that might be tasev v'lo mina asui, right? You have, let's say 15 high and 10 wide and 10 deep, great. And you just take out the middle one, so you have walls and schach left over. That should be very problematic of tasev v'lo mina asui. Like we learned about, the sukkah has to be built in a proper order. You can't put the schach up before you put the walls up. And this wasn't a room. It was just a heap of straw, so that doesn't work. We'll see in a little bit as to how problematic, in fact, that is. So these were the two Mishnayos that Rabbi Yaakov heard from Rabbi Yochanan. And then Rabbi Yaakov is going to present two rationales as to why each of these were problematic, but he doesn't know which rationale applies to which case. Case number one is our Mishnah of the bundles, where you want to possibly use them as schach. Case number two is where you're carving out a sukkah from amidst the whole pile of bundles, and he doesn't know which of the following two reasons applies to each of the cases. Here's number one, chada mishum gzeras otzar. One is that we had a concern about gzeras otzar, which we're going to learn about in a little bit. Chada mishum tasev v'lo mina asui, and one of them was about doing something out of order, which is a psul. And in short, the gzeras otzar is a din derabanan, that we are afraid that someone is going to misuse schach in a way which would be problematic. So let's take a look at, let's see where this Rashi is. Oh, no Rashi here. Okay, a little bit later. So then the Gemara says, these are the two concerns. And then the Gemara says 2/3 of the way down, Rabbi Yaakov is still speaking. Remember when we were little kids, you'd have to draw a line from the question to the answer. So we have our two questions and we have our two answers. We just don't know, we don't know which way the lines go. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yirmiyah, I don't know what the problem is. Let's take a look. In other words, I know the answer and I'm going to tell it to you, but I'm going to say, let's see and take a look together because I'm being a nice guy. But the answer is right in front of you. To Amar Reb Chia bar Abba, Amar Rav Yochanan, same Rav Yochanan who taught these same Mishnayos to Rabbi Yaakov. Mipnei ma amru chavile kash v'chavile eitzim v'chavile zerodin ein mesachachin bahem. Mipnei ma heim amru, they, the chachamim. Why is our Mishnah rabbinically opposed to doing this? Why did the chachamim say that when it came to bundles of kash, of straw, of wood, and of twigs, that you cannot make schach? And the Gemara answers this rabbinic concern with a deoraisa concern. The rabbinic concern is this concept of otzar. Let's see how the concern plays out. Because pamim, sometimes, sh'adam bamina sadeh ba'erev, a person has been working all day in the field, b'chavilaso al kasefo, he comes home with a big bundle on his shoulder of all of the wheat that he gathered that day, tied up in a perfect bow. Umalo manich al gabe sukaso kadeli yapsha. And he takes it and puts it on top of the sukkah so that it can dry, just to let it dry out. If you don't let it dry out, it can get ruined, it can mold. So fine, he wants to let it dry. He put it up for that reason. And then he changed his mind. The nimlach aleha l'sichuch. And then he said, you know what? This is actually perfect for schach. Let me just leave the bundle of straw on top of the sukkah. All is well. Says the Gemara, not all is well, because if you were to do that, says the Gemara, v'hatorah amra taseh, v'lo min ha'asui. So if you were to have in fact done this, that you put the schach, a bundle of straw on top of a sukkah, not for the purpose of schach, just for the purpose of drying out. And once it's up there, you're like, hey, you know what? One less thing to do, my sukkah is built already. So the halacha is that that's a psul deoraisa. And therefore, because that is a psul deoraisa, we therefore don't allow any bundles of hay to be put up, even if you put it up there with the right intentions. Doesn't make a difference. It's a rabbinic injunction. We do not put up bundles of hay as schach out of concern of gzeras otzar, that we're afraid that you may inadvertently put it up to dry and change your mind, and that would be a psul. So we have an isser deraisa concern, but here we have a rabbinic injunction to never use bundles, even if your intention is perfect. So therefore, says the Gemara, the second to last of the short lines, midahomishum gzeras otzar, because our Mishnah is dealing with an isser derabanan, hamishum taseh v'lo asui, the second taseh v'lo min ha'asui, the second case where you're carving out the shape of a sukkah from amidst a stack of many bundles of schach, that must be the concern of taseh v'lo min ha'asui. It's rational to us anyway to say that that case is taseh v'lo min ha'asui, because you're leaving up walls, you're pulling out the ones in the middle, you make a doorway, you pull out 4 stacks in a row, you got a nice door, you keep pulling them out till your sukkah is absolutely perfect, but the schach's already there. Taseh v'lo min ha'asui. So that's what the Gemara says. And in fact, it's so obvious that the Gemara doesn't understand why Rabbi Yaakov didn't know the answer. Asks the Gemara, last short line, Rabbi Yaakov, what's the deal? You're big Talmud Chacham. Why don't you know the answer to this? So it says the Gemara, because Hachta Reb Chia bar Abba lo shmiale. He just never heard the answer. He could have conjectured and postured on his own. He just didn't know the answer. So that is the Gemara's conclusion. It says the Gemara, hold on one second. Amar Rav Ashi. Atu chavile kash v'chavile eitzim mishu gzeras otzar ika. I understand you're concerned about the bundles of straw and the bundles of wood. I understand about that you have a rabbinic concern to never use them, even if you're putting them on the roof for the right reason, out of concern that you may put them up for the right reason, gzeras otzar ika. But why don't you also say that mishum taseh that velo mina asu? Why do you say leka? Why doesn't that apply? Remember, we had two cases and two laws, and we said that our Mishnah is about Gzeras Osir. Why isn't our Mishnah also about Tasav V'lo Min Asui? So it says the Gemara, Mishum Tasav V'lo Min Asui, Leka. And not only that, but in the second case, V'hachote, the case where you're carving out Begadish from a whole pile of bundles, there we said it's Mishum Tasav V'lo Min Asui because you're carving out a Sukkah, Schach's already in place, and you're basically carving out the opening with the roof in place. That's Tasav V'lo Min Asui. But don't you also have Mishum Gzeras Osar Leka? Don't you also have the rabbinic concern on top of that when you put the schach there in the first place, it shouldn't work either? That should be Asar Midrabanan. Forget about the Psul Deoraisa. We should also be Asar Midrabanan, even before you get to any Dinei Deoraisa. So it says the Gemara, and this is where the language becomes very key. There's a difference in language between the two cases, between our Mishnah, which spoke about the bundles, and the case of Chotet, where you're going to be carving out an inside sukkah from within the pile of all of the straw. The Rav Yochanan Amar Lach, he'll answer for you, and we're in the bottom line of Yud Beis Mud Aleph. He will answer, Hacha Diktani, here in our Mishnah. What does our Mishnah say? If you scan back up at our Mishnah halfway down, it says at the second line of our Mishnah, Ein Mesachachin Bo. So we're quoting that word Ein. Last line, Amar Lach Hacha Diktani, here in our case where the bundles are not allowed to be used by rabbinic injunction of Otzar Gzeira, we're afraid that you may put it up for the wrong reason. The language of our Mishnah was Ein Mesachachin Bahen. That's lechatchilahu. That's it. You're not allowed to use it. Top of your Beis Manav. That's only lechatchila. But de'ein mesachachin mishum gzeras otzar. That's only a din derabanan. Hadeoraisa shapir dami. Technically speaking, if I want to use schach of a bundle of straw and my intent is correct, I'm putting it on top of this sukkah to be schach. So afal pi that mi derabanan, it's not right. I violated an isser derabanan. But lemais, at the end of the day, it still works. And that's the diuk on the language in our Mishnah, which was a more gentle language of ein misachachin bahem. It's not puzzle, it's not usr, it's ein misachachin, and you shouldn't do it. But if you did it, it would still be kosher midoraisa. But hasam, in the case where you're carving out a sukkah from within a bundle of many, many bundles of the straw, hasam, second line, dikatani, ein a sukkah. Doesn't say in mesachachin bahen. Look at the language. Ein a sukkah. It's not a sukkah. That's not a psul derabanan. Afilu diavad midoraisa nami ein a sukkah. Even if you already did it, zero. A total flat line. That's not a sukkah. So the difference in language in the two Mishnayos. Our Mishnah says ein mesachachin bahen. You should not use this for schach. Versus the second Mishnah, which says ein a sukkah. Very different. Therefore, the one that's ein a sukkah, much stronger, that's triggering the din deoraisa of taseh v'lo min aseh, which is a psul deoraisa. But our Mishnah, which is ein mesachachin behen, you shouldn't use it. You shouldn't do it. If you're going to do it, it's going to be kosher. That's ein mesachachin behen. That's the isser derabanan, says Rav Yochanan. That's the isser derabanan of gzeras otzar. We're going to learn a couple of cases right now. That, if you ever, let's say that you have 49% of schach, and the last option for you to use is a broomstick. Is a broomstick considered to be makabel tuma? A kli that's makabel tuma? Yes or no? We can make a very easy diuk from this Gemara. Says the Gemara, third line, Yud Beis Amud Beis. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Sichicha bechitzin zicharim kshera benekevos psula. If you make schach out of a chetz, out of a piece of wood, out of an arrow, the wood that goes into an arrow that's a zachar, namely, let's say that you have an arrow, and the end of that arrow is a tapered extension that goes inside an arrow. Okay, so that's the wood is the male part, the arrow is the female part. If the wood is the male part, it has a protrusion at the end that extends into the arrow. So then says the Gemara, kshera, no problem. But benekevos psula. But if it were to be that the arrow was the male portion and it inserted into the wood, and therefore the wood at its end had a base kibul, had a little hole in it to receive the arrow, that's psula. That's psula. So says the Gemara, that's great. Zacharim ksheira pshita. I could have told you that. That's our broomsticks. Our broomsticks at the end have threading on it to screw into the plastic of the bottom of the broom, right? Most of them are made that way. So if at the end of the wood, it has the male portion, which has the threads in it, and then it can be put onto the broom, that's great. That's totally kosher. Says the Gemara pshita. In fact, it's so obvious that that's kosher. Why would you even bother teaching me that if you have a piece of wood that has a protrusion at the end to be inserted into another part of the kli, of course that's kosher? Answers the Gemara, 5th, 6th line. Mahu detema. I had to teach this for the following reason, because if I didn't teach that a piece of wood that has a slight extension on it, mahu detema nigzor zechar matu nekevos. I might have thought that if there was a handle on it that had a male protrusion, I might have made a gzera derabana that should not be used, because it's easy to mix up with a piece of wood that has a concave on the other side to receive something. So there says the Gemara, kamash malan, that's not true. That as long as the wood has a protrusion at its end, it's considered kosher. And says the Gemara as well, 1/3 of the way down, benekevos psula shita. Pshita, that also should be the case, that it should be obvious that if at the end of the wood there's a kli kibul, there's an indentation to receive another kli. Let's say the arrow, the metal part, has an extension that should go into the wood. So then for sure that piece of wood should be a problem, because it's makabel. It has a base kibul in it. If it has a base kibul, then it's makabel tuma, because it's a kli. So it says the Gemara, that's pshita also. Why did you have to tell me that the nekevos, that a piece of wood that has an opening in order to ensure something can be inserted into it, that's psula? Says the Gemara, because ma'udetema base kibul ha'asui lemalos lo shmei kibul kamash malan. This is a lomda shaline. I might have argued that if the way that the arrow was made, that the piece of wood had a hole in it in which to receive the arrow, but because the whole point of the hole in the wood was to be filled up by the arrow, therefore it's not considered a base kibul. That's not the final product. The final product is when the arrow is put in. So havamina that maybe it would be kosher, because even though it has a base kibul to receive the arrow, but my greater concern is, what does the final product look like? And there's no arrow yet, so therefore the wood is not a kli yet. It should be mutter. Kamash malan, that's not the case, says the Gemara. Kamash malan, that once there's a base kibul, even if the arrow has yet to be put in, it is still going to be considered a problem. Says the Gemara, next case. Amar Rabba bar bar Chana Amar Rav Yochanan. Flax was very common to be used back in the day. 3-step process for prepping it. First, they would soak it to soften it, and then they would smash it to get it to its fibers, and then they would comb it from all of its impurities. So says Rav Yochanan halfway down, Sichicha ba'anitze pishtan psula. Once you have flax that's been combed already, its last part of the process, it's soaking, beating, and then combing. Once it's been combed already, for sure that's psula, that's makabel tuma, that's a final product. That's not allowed to be used. Behutzni, if it's unprocessed, right, you haven't done anything to it, then everyone agrees that pishtan ksheira, that you can use flax for schach, no problem at all. The bigger problem is behushni. All of these words are very similar and not normal words. Hushni, the shin reminds me of partial, just so that I can remember it's only partially prepared. And here the Gemara says, Eini yodea mahu. First of all, says the Gemara, I don't know what the din is. And second of all, I don't even know what stage of preparation I'm talking about when I say I don't know. It's a double lack of knowledge. V'hushni atzman eini yodea. And says the Gemara, manafshach. No matter how you look at it, I'm just not sure. If it's been crushed but not combed, maybe there we say hushni karile. But aval tari, had it been soaked velo daik, then hutsni karile, then for sure that's going to be considered unprocessed. O dilma, or perhaps no, tari velo daik nami hushni karile, or maybe even if you only do the first step of soaking, that's also considered partial flax, and therefore it enters the category of I'm not sure what to do with it, and the Gemara leaves it without any clear knowledge. Amar Rav Yehuda, Hani Shushe V'Shavtzari. So I didn't have a chance to write this down in my Gemara, and I couldn't remember what it was. So I have it right here. It says in the article, ferns and artemisia. These are different types of trees or bushes that were used for schach. So Rabbi Yehuda, the Amora, says that misachachin behu, you're allowed. Abaye says you're not allowed. Why? Abaye Amar, b'shushe mesachachin, with the first one, with ferns, you are allowed, but b'shavtzari, you're not. With artemisia, you're not allowed. Lo mesachachin. Why? What's wrong with artemisia? So says the Gemara, my taima, kevan desari rechaihu, since it smells very bad, Rashi, mavish recham, it smells terrible. It's an awful smell. Shavik lehu. People are going to leave the sukkah v'nafik. And because of that, it's not a psul inherently in it. It's the right material. It checks all the boxes of not being mekabel tuma and gidula min haaretz. The problem is that it kicks people out of the sukkah. It smells awful. So therefore, you're not allowed, again, not a psul inherently. It's a secondary problem, but therefore you're not allowed to use it. Last case for the night. Top of Yud Gimel Amid Aleph. Amar of Chanan bar Rava. Hani hizmi v'higi. These are different types of small thorny bushes. Mesachachin b'hu. Abai Amar behizmi mesachachinon. The first one, yes, behizmi, but behigi with thorn bushes lo mesachachinon. My timer. Why not? Kevan denasre tarfaihu shavik levenafik. Since its leaves readily fall off of the branch and will fall into your food, it's super annoying. Who wants to eat soup with thorns in it? That's for sure going to be very annoying. Shavik levenafik, and therefore a person should not use the higi, but they are allowed to use the hizmi. We're going to stop right here, 5 lines down on Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. We will pick up tomorrow night with Daf Yud Gimel. Wishing you all a beautiful night.